The consensus among experts is that at some point in the coming century, humanity will become a multi-planetary species. For pioneers of this incredible idea, Mars seems to be the preferred destination to start our interplanetary journey. But as we get closer to achieving this grand vision, we must also prepare for bottlenecks that may arise. So join us in today's video as we take a forensic look at the plan to colonize Mars and explore the potential legal, human rights, and multiplanetarism challenges that we are bound to face. It is the year 2050. The first human entourage just arrived on Mars to begin their new life on the Red Planet. In the first few weeks, everything goes according to plan. Scientists are mining oxygen, water, and other minerals necessary to sustain their existence. At the same time, the dedicated chefs are working around the clock to ensure that everyone gets the correct portion of the pre-agreed 3 square meals every day, even as researchers continue to perform regular experiments in a bid to improve the standard of life on the Martian world. But somewhere down the line, a fight breaks out, and there's a need for legal intervention. If we widen the scope and consider the human society on Mars in its entirety, we would have quite a number of legal-related problems on our hands. These problems don't necessarily exist on Earth because we have laws that suffice for such situations. This sort of arrangement clearly does not exist on Mars. So, if someone were to infringe on your rights anywhere on the surface of the Martian world, there'd be no way to legally get justice as required or recommended within the provision of the law. But could you possibly file a case to sue the person on Earth? Well, it's a matter of jurisdiction. The normal practice here on Earth is that an offense is usually tried in the jurisdiction in which it was committed, except where there's a provision for ground jurisdiction or in special cases where statutes and other relevant legal protocols are enacted to exercise extraterritorial jurisdiction. Going by this explanation, it means any conflict that occurs on Mars can be filed or judged here on Earth under certain circumstances. Currently, there is no legal framework in place to govern criminal activity on Mars, as no human settlement or jurisdiction exists on the planet. However, there are ongoing discussions and international efforts to establish a legal framework for activities on other celestial bodies, including Mars, through the United Nations Committee of the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. In the absence of a specific legal framework, it is possible that a crime committed on Mars by a person or group affiliated with a particular country or organization could be subject to the jurisdiction and laws of their home country or organization. It is also possible that an international tribunal could be established to deal with such cases in the future. Ultimately, the resolution of any criminal activity on Mars would depend on the establishment of an agreed-upon legal framework for activities on the planet. Speaking around this, Charles Cockle, an astrobiologist at the University of Edinburgh, mentioned a quite unique but powerful scenario, saying that there are things about space that are completely different from the Earth environment, in particular, the issue of who controls the oxygen. This is quite interesting, as oxygen, as we know, is a fundamental element that is required for humans to survive. Imagine if someone or a group of people had control over it. This could lead to anarchy. A space colony is a tyranny-prone environment, Cockle warns, citing that no constitution so far has listed the right to breathable air. If someone gets control of oxygen, they could very well have control over the whole population and could threaten dire consequences in return for extraordinary levels of power. And if indeed we see an outbreak of violence where a member of the crew attacks another member, would it be regarded as a regular murder just like we do on Earth? And if that's the case, how and where will the offender be prosecuted? And again, how do we determine the jurisdiction? These are some of the biggest questions begging for answers, but unfortunately, there's no precedent to fall back on when making decisions in such situations. However, we can reference the existing 1999 agreement that governs the activities of astronauts from the European Union, Canada, Russia, Japan, and the United States on the International Space Station Agreement. Based on this agreement, each partner state is allowed to exercise the laws of its own jurisdiction in criminal matters as they involve its citizens. As such, when an American astronaut commits a crime on the ISS, the United States would have jurisdiction to prosecute the crime. But when an astronaut from one nationality commits a crime against a member of the crew from another nationality, for instance, if an American offends a Russian astronaut, the offender could be prosecuted under Russian jurisdiction and law. However, considering the number of nationalities that might make this trip to Mars, identifying the right jurisdiction could be a serious problem. Having considered all these potential problems that we might face on the Red Planet, a group of experts at the Second International Extraterrestrial Liberty Conference, aka ELC, recently proposed a constitution that would guarantee the freedom of citizens if a human colony is eventually established on Mars. The future of humanity beyond the Earth is a fascinating subject, says Charles Cockle, a respected astrobiologist and the organizer of this event. One of the things that has been so important in the history of human civilization is freedom and liberty. So what we wanted to do was think about liberty beyond the Earth. Considering that a new civilization would be created from scratch, the delegation of specialists reached a consensus to classify oxygen as one of the fundamental human rights on Mars, meaning everyone that lands on the Red Planet will be entitled to oxygen as long as it is available. Secondly, they agree that every member of the human contingent on Mars must be allowed to leave at will. However, they didn't specify who would foot the airfare back to Earth. Even more concerning, we could have a situation where the colony is controlled by a private corporation, which could lead to a number of possibilities. For instance, would they have the right to sack citizens? And if they do, what would be the fate of the sacked citizens? On the other hand, the human community on Mars could operate a refined form of democracy. One of the ideas that has been suggested is the awkward democratic system practiced in ancient Greece, where members of the government are partly elected but also consist of people selected through a lottery. In a sealed space colony, having a system where everyone has a vested interest in the political system is a good thing to do, Charles Cockle says. Apathy in a lethal, hostile environment is extremely dangerous. Admittedly, there are still quite a number of things that could go wrong even with the existence of a constitution. For one, for these laws to be implemented, we must set up law enforcement agencies and correctional facilities like prisons, for instance. As far as we know, provisions have not been made for any of these yet. Also, given the situation, we could have a tyrant dispute the political stability in a bid to establish a new order. As of today, it is difficult to predict with certainty what kind of society will emerge on Mars, as it would depend on a variety of factors, such as the goals and values of the people who established the colony, the resources available to them, and the political and economic systems they put in place. Anarchy is typically defined as a state of disorder or absence of government and control, is a possibility in any society, including a hypothetical Martian society. However, it is important to note that anarchy is not the same as chaos or violence. Anarchist communities and organizations have existed throughout history, and some advocate for a society based on principles of mutual aid, voluntary cooperation, and direct democracy, rather than hierarchical structures and coercion. That being said, it is likely that any society on Mars would require some form of government and social order to ensure the well-being and safety of its inhabitants, as well as the sustainable use of resources. The specific form of governance and social organization would depend on the values and properties of the people who established the colony. It is also possible that the Martian colony would be subject to regulations and oversight from Earth-based governments or international bodies, which could also affect the nature of its social organization. But before all this, we must sort out the biggest barriers to date to be able to set foot on the Red Planet.